The sound hit me before I even opened my eyes. That low, chest-deep rumble, the kind you feel in your back teeth before your brain catches up and figures out what it is. I grabbed my coffee, walked to the kitchen window, and there they were, 7 excavators, rolling down my driveway in a column, single file, like they owned the place. Which, according to Beverly Crace, they did. It was 6:14 in the morning. I hadn't finished my first cup. The dew was still on the cedar fence posts. I could smell it, that clean, sharp mix of morning pine and wet soil. And Beverly? She was parked at the road in her pearl-white Escalade, engine running, never once got out of the car. That was the moment I stopped being a man who avoided conflict and started being something else entirely. What would you do if you woke up to 7 excavators on your property? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And where are you watching from? Because HOA horror stories are everywhere, and I need to know I'm not alone. Let me back up, because to understand what Beverly Crace did to me, you need to understand what that fence meant. I bought this land in 1999, 2.3 acres outside Cloverfield County, unincorporated, rural, no HOA in sight. That was half the appeal, honestly. I was 33 years old, freshly self-employed as an electrician, and I wanted dirt under my boots and nobody telling me what color to paint my shutters. I built the house myself, mostly. Hired out the framing, did everything else on my own time. And in 2002, on a Sunday in October when the air smelled like dry leaves and chimney smoke, I built the fence, 4-rail cedar, sank every post with a borrowed digger and my own back. My wife at the time brought out sandwiches. The dog ran the perimeter like she was inspecting it. That fence followed the recorded property boundary exactly. I had it surveyed in 1999 when I bought the place, and again in 2009 just to be sure. 2 orange survey stakes still in the ground, right where Aldrich and Sons put them. The marriage didn't last. Carol kept the HOA membership. She joined a neighborhood group a few miles over, and she kept the resentment. What I kept was the land and the fence. For years, it was quiet. I ran my electrical business, took on commercial jobs, built up a decent client list. I wasn't getting rich, but I was doing all right. The kind of life where Friday afternoon means something. Then 2020 happened. And I don't just mean the pandemic. I mean Beverly Crace. Beverly had been president of the Cloverfield Meadows HOA for 9 consecutive years at that point. 9 years. She had an engraved name badge she wore to every meeting. She kept a binder, an actual 3-ring binder, with a violation file on every resident in the neighborhood. She drove that pearl Escalade slowly past people's houses like a landlord doing rounds. And in 2020, she pulled off something clever. She engineered a county council maneuver that technically annexed my street into the Cloverfield Meadows HOA jurisdiction. Every homeowner on the block got folded in. Except there was a problem, for Beverly anyway. I had bought my property before the HOA's founding covenant date. Legally, I was never a member. I voted no on the annexation. I was the only one. And because of that purchase timing, my vote actually meant something. I wasn't bound. Beverly did not like that. The notices started coming. Grass too long. Truck parked facing the wrong direction. Fence not an HOA-approved color. I want you to picture that for a second. A grown adult with a name badge and a violation binder, driving past my house, writing down that my truck was parked facing south instead of north. I kept every letter, filed them in a manila folder, dated and labeled, the way I'd logged electrical permits for 20 years. Old habit. Here's what I noticed over time. Every notice arrived the day after Beverly had driven slowly past my property. So I started logging those dates too. The drive-bys, the letters, the timing. I didn't know yet what she was building toward. I just knew she was building towards something. 3 weeks before the excavators showed up, I got a certified letter. Attached to it was a survey, conducted by a firm called Drexel Land Services, claiming my eastern cedar fence line was 11 feet over what the HOA was now calling a common easement corridor. Land, they said, belonged to the community. The letter gave me 72 hours to voluntarily remove the fence, or, it said, remediation will proceed. I called the HOA office. Beverly answered herself. "Garrett, honey," she said, "I'm just following the documents." I hung up, opened the legal pad to a fresh page, and wrote, Day 1. They came on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because I'd had a commercial job cancel that morning, which was the only reason I was home. The lead excavator operator, big guy, work vest, not making eye contact, started at the north post of my fence. 40 minutes later, 140 feet of cedar rail was on the ground. The fence I'd built on a Sunday in October, gone before I finished my second cup of coffee. Beverly had sent a property manager, her own employee, as I'd find out later, to plant small orange flags every 11 feet along the new claimed line. The line, she said, was the easement boundary. One of those flags went through my tomato plants, right through them, like it was making a point. I didn't yell, didn't call anybody. What I did was go get my measuring tape and my clipboard. I walked that new line, calmly, methodically, while the excavator crews were still loading up. I photographed every flag, every machine. I wrote down the serial numbers off the side panels of all 7 excavators. The operators watched me like I was doing something strange. I probably was. And then I drove to the county recorder's office and asked one simple question. Was there a demolition permit filed for my address? There wasn't. Now, here's something most people don't know, and I sure didn't until I started digging. In most U.S. counties, tearing down a structure on disputed private property requires a permit, especially when ownership of that line is being contested. No permit means the demolition was illegal. Doesn't matter how many machines you sent, doesn't matter how official the letter looked. If there's no permit, the work wasn't authorized. The moment I had that confirmed in writing from the recorder's office, the whole thing changed shape. That afternoon, I drove to the county sheriff, filed a report for criminal destruction of property, submitted 47 photographs, the certified letter, and the recorder's written confirmation of no permit on file. The deputy, a guy named Hofstede who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, told me it was probably a civil matter. I said, "That's fine. I just need the report number for my attorney." I didn't have an attorney yet, but the report number was real, and somewhere across town, in a Pearl Escalade, Beverly Crace had no idea I'd just started a paper trail that would bury her. 24 hours later, a letter arrived. Letterhead read, Crace Property Solutions Legal Department. Fancy font, very official looking. It threatened me with a $4,200 easement obstruction fee and warned that any attempt to replace the fence would result in immediate injunction proceedings. There was one problem, and it took my daughter Mallory about 11 minutes on the phone to spot it. Mallory is a paralegal. She is 29 years old, drinks too much cold brew, and has a particular talent for reading legal documents the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. I'd scanned the letter and emailed it to her that same evening. She called me back before I'd sat down to dinner. "Dad," she said, "this isn't from the HOA. This is from her company. She threatened you in her personal capacity, using HOA letterhead. That's potentially fraud." I sat down at the kitchen table. The dog put her chin on my knee. "Don't touch the fence line," Mallory said. "Don't respond. Don't say a word to Beverly, and mail me everything you have, tonight." That's the thing about Beverly's move that she didn't think through. She blurred the line between her HOA authority and her private LLC, and she signed the letter herself with both titles. HOA President, CEO of Crace Property Solutions, on the same line, in the same ink. In her mind, that probably looked like power, having 2 titles, 2 letterheads, double the authority. What it actually was evidence. I put the letter in a new folder, labeled it Crace Property Solutions, Personal Liability, set it next to the manila folder of HOA notices. The stack was getting taller. Outside, where the fence used to be, the soil was still churned up from the excavator treads. You could smell it, that raw diesel and wet clay smell of ground that's been torn open. The orange flags were still out there, glowing faintly in the dark under the porch light, like tiny little accusations planted in my garden. I looked at them for a while. Then I went inside and made more coffee. 4 days after the demolition, Beverly called an emergency HOA board meeting. The agenda item, as listed in the email she sent to 112 residents, formalize Eastern Easement Corridor as HOA common property. I didn't receive notice, of course. I was never a legal member. But Dutch Kowalski, my neighbor, 66 years old, retired union iron worker, and a man with absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense, forwarded me the email from his phone, along with a message that just said, "You seeing this?" I was seeing it. The vote passed 6-1. Dutch was the one. I'm told he raised his hand during the vote and said, "This seems like horse manure dressed in a bow tie." He was outvoted. Beverly filed the vote result with the county the next morning as a community resolution. It wasn't legally binding. A neighborhood association can't vote to claim land it doesn't own, any more than my book club could vote to annex the gas station on Route 9. But on paper, it looked official. And that, I was starting to understand, was always the point with Beverly. Looking official was her whole game. I drove out to Hampscomb Title that same week. It's a small office in a strip mall, the kind with the same carpet since 1987, and a bell over the door. Lenny Hampscomb is 80 years old, moves slowly, thinks fast, and keeps handwritten ledger books in a climate-controlled back room that smells like old paper and cedar chips. Lenny had handled my original deed in 1999. I asked him to pull the chain of title all the way back to the original plat. He disappeared into the back room for about 20 minutes, came out carrying a document in a clear sleeve, a hand-drawn survey map on linen paper, the ink faded to sepia at the edges, county surveyor's signature, official stamp, recorded in 1952. The recorded plat showed my eastern boundary at exactly the line my cedar fence had followed. Exactly. The 11-foot easement corridor Beverly had claimed, it didn't exist in any recorded document. Not in the 1952 plat. Not in any amendment filed since. It was invented. This is where things get important, and I want to be clear about this because it matters. For an HOA to claim an easement, a right to use or control a piece of land, that easement has to be recorded in the original plat, or via a formal amendment signed by the affected property owners and filed with the county. A neighborhood vote doesn't create an easement. A certified letter doesn't create one. A fraudulent survey doesn't create one. If it's not in the recorded plat, it's not real. Beverly had spent $8,400 of HOA money on a survey that claimed something that had never legally existed. Speaking of which, Mallory had been busy while I was at Hampscomb Title. She'd spent 2 evenings going through the state business registry, pulling LLC filings, cross-referencing registered agents, and she found something. Drexel Land Services, the surveying firm that conducted Beverly's boundary report, shared a registered agent with Crace Property Solutions. Same attorney, same filing address, same LLC formation date, March of 2019. Beverly didn't just commission a fraudulent survey. She commissioned it from her own company, operating under a different name, and she billed the HOA for it. The membership, Dutch, the Hendersons down the block, the retired school teacher on the corner, they all paid dues that went into Beverly's pocket, laundered through a shell company, in exchange for a document that helped her steal someone's land. Mallory's email to me that night was 4 words and a period. "Dad, this is fraud." I printed it out and added it to the folder. That night I sat at the kitchen table with everything spread out in front of me. The 1952 plat copy from Lenny, Mallory's LLC printouts, Beverly's threatening letter, the county's confirmation of no demolition permit. The dog was asleep by the radiator. The kitchen smelled like the reheated chili I hadn't actually eaten. What I felt, sitting there, wasn't anger. It was something quieter and more useful than anger. It was the same feeling I used to get on a complex wiring job when all the circuits finally mapped out, and I could see exactly where every wire needed to go. I picked up the legal pad and started drawing lines. Beverly's next move was quieter, which, somehow, felt worse. She started working the neighborhood the old-fashioned way, one phone call at a time, telling residents my property might have unpermitted structures, suggesting she'd been in contact with the county building department. She posted cryptically on the Cloverfield Facebook group, "Some neighbors have chosen confrontation over community. We remain committed to legal compliance." 61 people liked it. Nobody named names. Everybody knew. Then she did something I genuinely hadn't expected. She called Carol. My ex-wife and Beverly had been in the same book club for years. So when Beverly needed someone to put pressure on me from a direction I wasn't watching, Carol was the obvious play. Carol called me on a Wednesday evening and told me I should just let Beverly have the strip of land. It's not worth it. I said, "Thanks, Carol," and hung up. Here's the thing about a smear campaign. It only works if you respond to it. If you stay quiet, it just burns itself out. Beverly wanted me reactive and public, so I gave her nothing. I stopped posting in the neighborhood group, stopped responding to letters, just kept logging and kept building the file. A week later, Beverly filed a complaint with the county building department, alleging my house had an unpermitted addition, a mudroom I'd built off the back in 2011. An inspector named Walt Deering came out the following Thursday. I met him at the door with a cup of coffee and my permit binder. Every permit I'd ever pulled since buying this property, filed in chronological order in a 3-inch binder, tabbed by year, including the mudroom, including the rough-in inspection, the insulation inspection, and the certificate of occupancy. Walt Deering flipped through it the way a man does when he realizes he just drove 45 minutes for nothing useful. Closed the complaint in 45 minutes flat. As he was heading back to his truck, I asked him one thing. Could he note in the file that this complaint was filed the same week I entered a property dispute with the HOA president? He looked at me for a second. Then he said, "I can do that." Small thing, but it mattered. Every data point mattered now. Meanwhile, Mallory had been building something on her end that Beverly couldn't see coming from any direction. She filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, documenting the fraudulent survey, the self-dealing LLC structure, and the misuse of HOA funds. She was thorough, 31 pages, attachments. Then we filed a separate complaint with the State Real Estate Commission. Beverly had surrendered her real estate license in 2019, voluntarily, the record said, under circumstances that were never made fully public. Something about an appraiser. Nothing was ever proven, but the commission had an open file. The self-dealing LLC structure from 2019 onward gave them something concrete to look at. Most people think HOA problems are just neighbor disputes, annoying but basically civil. What they don't realize is this. In most states, HOA board members who direct association funds to their own private companies, without disclosing that conflict of interest to the membership, are violating state HOA governance statutes. It's not just a board removal offense. It's personal liability, meaning Beverly, not the HOA, could be held responsible for the money. The moment Mallory made that argument to the AG's office in writing, Beverly's LLC stopped being a smart business structure and started being a personal financial liability. Beverly interpreted my silence as surrender. Of course she did. That's what petty authority always assumes, that quiet means beaten. She sent me a letter, gracious tone, very magnanimous. Garrett, I hope we can move forward as good neighbors. The easement has been formalized. There's no need for further conflict. I read it at the kitchen table. Then I walked to the fridge and taped it to the door with a piece of electrical tape. It made an excellent exhibit later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Outside, the garden was growing back in around the churned-up soil where the fence had been. Weeds, mostly, but also one of the tomato plants Beverly's orange flag had gone through. It had righted itself and kept growing. Stubborn little thing. I appreciated that about it. I opened the legal pad to a new page and wrote 2 words at the top. Phase 2. Mallory drove up on a Friday evening with a box of folders, a laptop, and the specific energy of a person who has found something and is waiting for the right moment to show you. We spread everything across the kitchen table. The 1952 plat, the HOA covenants, Beverly's LLC filings, the fraudulent Drexel survey, 3 years of HOA meeting minutes, a pot of coffee, cold pizza by hour 2. I was reading through the survey numbers again, comparing measurements, when Mallory looked up from the covenant document. She was quiet for a second. Dad, read page 14, section 7B. I took the paper, read it again. The HOA's own founding covenant, the document Beverly had used as her authority for 9 years, contained a clause on page 14 that explicitly prohibited the HOA from claiming, acquiring, or altering boundary structures on non-member parcels, without a recorded plat amendment filed with the county, and without written consent from the affected property owner. I had never been a legal HOA member. My parcel had never been incorporated into the plat. Beverly's community resolution vote was not a plat amendment. She had never obtained my written consent. She had, in other words, zero legal authority to touch my fence. None. The entire operation, the fraudulent survey, the board vote, the orange flags, the 7 excavators, was built on a foundation that her own founding documents had specifically forbidden. I set the paper down. Then Mallory said, "That's not the best part." She slid the 1952 plat across the table and pointed to the eastern boundary measurement. I looked at the number, looked at the survey stakes in my memory, the ones I'd put in myself in 2009, the ones the excavators had torn out. My original fence hadn't been on my property line. It had been 3 feet inside it. For 22 years, I'd been conservative. I'd built 3 feet short of what was actually mine, which meant Beverly's claimed easement corridor didn't just lack legal basis, it physically trespassed onto my recorded property by 14 feet. The woman who sent 7 excavators to take my land had accidentally handed me a larger piece of hers. Mallory put down her highlighter, looked at me across the table, said, "Dad, she didn't take your land. She gave you hers." I went outside after that, needed a minute. I stood where the fence used to be. The soil was still rough and dark from the excavator work, that raw, mineral smell of ground that's been turned over, mixed with the faint diesel ghost that never quite leaves. The orange flags were still out there. I reached down and pulled one out of the earth. Just one. Looked at it, put it in my shirt pocket. Then I came back inside, opened the legal pad, and started a new page. The new fence wasn't going to be cedar. Cedar is beautiful, but it makes a point about a garden. What I was now planning would make a different kind of point. We were talking about 4-inch diameter galvanized steel posts, set in 18-inch diameter concrete footings, poured 42 inches deep, below the frost line, the way you pour something you want to last 200 years. Welded horizontal steel rail, the kind of fence a man builds when he needs the message to be permanent. And it would be built not on my old line, but on my real one, 3 feet wider, right across where every single one of those orange flags was standing. I started making calls. The first call was to Aldrich & Sons, the surveying firm that had been operating out of the next county since 1948. Old school, GPS-corrected total station equipment, filed same day with the county recorder. Not Drexel. Never Drexel. Their licensed surveyor came out that Thursday, set new stakes on the true boundary, the 1952 recorded line, 3 feet east of where my old cedar fence had stood. He filed the results with the county recorder that afternoon. It was now a matter of public record. This was my land, this was my line, and it was documented by an independent licensed professional who had no connection to Beverly Crace or any of her LLCs. The permit came next. I walked into the county building department, filled out the fence construction application, cited the Aldrich survey, referenced the 1952 plat, paid $140, and walked out with a stamped permit. Took about 20 minutes. That permit was now in the file next to Beverly's demolition that had no permit. The contrast was going to be relevant later. Mallory drafted a formal notice to the HOA board, not Beverly personally, but the full board as a body, informing them that construction of a boundary structure at the recorded plat line would commence on a specific Saturday. Sent certified mail, signed for by Beverly herself, which was either ironic or perfect. Both, probably. She also filed a formal property encroachment complaint with the county against the HOA for the illegal demolition and for the orange flags, which were physically planted on my recorded property. This created a second independent official record of Beverly's overreach, separate from the police report. Here's one most people don't think about. Mallory also filed a notice of dispute with the county recorder, a document that formally places on the public record that there is an active legal conflict regarding the boundary between my parcel and the adjacent HOA property. It costs almost nothing to file, but what it does is cloud the title on Beverly's adjacent property. That means she can't easily refinance, can't sell, can't do anything that requires a clean title report until the dispute is resolved. It's the legal equivalent of parking a tank in someone's financial driveway. Beverly had been angling to sell that adjacent lot to a developer, a deal she'd apparently already negotiated in private. The notice of dispute froze that deal solid. Meanwhile, Dutch was handling the material side of things. 2,200 pounds of Schedule 40 galvanized steel pipe and welded rail, sourced through a union supplier he'd known since 1991. Delivered on a flatbed on a Saturday morning, The same Saturday morning, Beverly was at her book club across town. The steel smelled like cutting oil and cold iron in the morning air. Dutch stood next to it with his arms crossed, looking approximately as satisfied as a man can look. Before any steel went in the ground, I installed 4 trail cameras, wide angle, motion activated, solar powered, pointed at the new survey stakes from 4 different angles. Beverly didn't know the stakes were there yet. She certainly didn't know about the cameras. I also contacted my homeowner's insurance company and opened a claim for the destroyed cedar fence, submitted the photographs, the police report number, the recorder's confirmation of no permit. The claim created a third independent financial record of what Beverly had done, this time with an insurance company, which is an institution that tends to take destruction of property somewhat seriously. Darcy Pruitt got a phone call from Mallory that week. Darcy covered municipal and county affairs for the regional paper, the kind of journalist who writes at 11 p.m. and answers emails at 6 a.m. Mallory didn't ask her for anything, just sent a document packet. The 1952 plat, the Drexel Crace registered agent overlap, the $8,400 HOA payment, the fraudulent survey, the TRO denial that hadn't happened yet but was coming. Darcy called back in 2 hours. "When does the fence go up?" "Saturday," Mallory told her. Around noon, something interesting might happen. Councilwoman Patricia Osei got a courtesy call too. Beverly had used the HOA as a political lever against Osei's rezoning proposal back in 2021, blocked it in a way that was petty and personal. Osei remembered. She asked to be kept informed. "I didn't tell any of these people what to do. I just made sure they knew what was true." The legal pad was now 31 pages. The coffee was permanent. The concrete truck was scheduled for 10 a.m. Saturday. Everything was pointed at one morning. All I had to do was not blink. Beverly got the certified notice on a Tuesday. I know this because Dutch texted me a photo of her reading it in the HOA parking lot. She read it 3 times, standing next to her Escalade in the afternoon sun. Then she got in the car and sat there for about 4 minutes before driving away. By Wednesday, she'd called her HOA attorney, a general practice lawyer named Whitmore, who mostly handled wills and real estate closings and was clearly out of his depth here. He told her, from what I was later able to piece together, that she should tread carefully. Beverly told him she didn't hire him to tread carefully. She filed for a temporary restraining order to halt fence construction. The filing cited her fraudulent Drexel survey and the HOA's unrecorded community resolution vote as its legal basis. She was asking a court to stop me from building a fence on my own property, on a line confirmed by a licensed surveyor and recorded with the county, based on documents she'd manufactured herself. The county court clerk flagged it immediately. The judge, Honorable Francis Whitfield, who by all accounts had roughly 0 patience for exactly this type of filing, reviewed it in chambers and denied it within 48 hours. No hearing. The denial was entered on the docket with a single line of reasoning. Plaintiff has not demonstrated legal standing to enjoin construction on a parcel not within the HOA's recorded jurisdiction. Mallory forwarded me the docket entry. I printed it out, added it to the folder. The folder was now thick enough that I'd had to move it to a binder. Beverly shifted tactics. She started calling HOA members individually, working the phones the way she'd probably worked buyers and sellers back in her real estate days. Telling people my fence would destroy property values, that I was confrontational, that the HOA might need to pass a special assessment to fund the legal fight. The legal fight that she had started, with their money, to benefit her own LLC, but she left that part out. Dutch kept me updated in real time. I kept logging. I didn't respond publicly to any of it. When you're building something, you don't stop to argue with the people watching. 2 HOA residents called me directly that week, both unprompted, both with the specific energy of people who have been waiting a long time for someone to push back. One of them told me Beverly had been running this HOA like her personal estate for 6 years. The other asked if I needed character witnesses. I took both their names and wrote them on the back page of the legal pad. Then Beverly came to my door. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was out back working on the truck, hands covered in grease, the radio playing something old and good. I heard the knock. Opened the door to find Beverly Crace standing on my porch in pressed slacks, looking like she'd come to give me one last chance to be reasonable. She offered to settle. $6,000, she said, for the disputed strip of land. Clean break. No more conflict. She smiled the way people smile when they're certain they're doing you a favor. I listened to the whole offer. Then I said, "I'll think about it." She left looking relieved. I went back inside, checked that the front trail camera, which I'd installed 2 weeks earlier, pointing at the porch, had caught everything clearly. It had. I wrote in the legal pad, Wednesday, settlement offer, $6,000, declined, recorded on camera. I didn't know the full number yet, but I had a rough sense of what that strip was worth at market rate. I was an electrician, not an appraiser, but I knew land. The strip she was trying to buy for $6,000 was worth somewhere north of $30,000, and it turned out she'd already quietly negotiated a sale of her adjacent lot to a developer, contingent on acquiring that strip to meet the minimum parcel dimensions for the subdivision. $6,000 was what she'd budgeted to steal something worth $34,000, after using HOA money to clear the way. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Almost. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The legal pad was 43 pages now. The concrete truck was confirmed for Saturday morning. The trail cameras were charged and running. Dutch had the steel staged in my barn. I was as ready as a man gets. Saturday came in cold and clear. 6:58 a.m. and the sky was that pale October blue that makes everything look sharp. Dutch's flatbed pulled up at 7. 2,200 pounds of Schedule 40 galvanized steel, pipe, rail, hardware, loaded clean on a wooden pallet. The smell of cutting oil hit me as soon as the gate dropped. Cold iron, and something industrial and honest about it. The smell of material that means business. Dutch stepped down from the cab with a thermos of gas station coffee and the look of a man who had been waiting for this exact morning for a long time. "You ready?" he said. I told him I'd been ready for 3 weeks. The Aldrich surveyor arrived at 7:30. His presence was technically not required for the build. I'd asked him to be there anyway. Having a licensed surveyor on site, watching the posts go in against his own recorded stakes, was the kind of detail that looks very good in a legal proceeding. He knew that. I knew that. We didn't discuss it. He just set up his equipment and started taking notes. By 8:15, we had the whole layout marked and the first post holes augured. The air smelled like turned earth and fresh concrete dust from the bags Dutch had stacked near the barn. Backup material mostly, for the footings we were setting before the truck arrived. Beverly drove past for the first time at 8:30. Slow roll in the Escalade, window up, not stopping. Trail camera got her plate and the timestamp. She came back at 9, same thing. By 9:15, she'd called the county building department, because one of the clerks there apparently knew Dutch and texted him about it. The building department confirmed to her, over the phone, that the permit was valid, that the survey was on file, that there was nothing to stop the work. She parked at the road at 9:45, and then, for the first time since any of this started, Beverly Crace got out of the Escalade. She walked up my driveway in kitten heels on packed gravel. I could hear every step from 40 feet away, that dry, rhythmic crunch of hard leather on stone. She stopped about 10 feet from where Dutch and I were working and told us to stop immediately, that she was ordering us to cease construction, that she had legal authority, that she would call the police. I pulled off one work glove, set down my level, and walked over to where the Aldrich surveyor's most recent stake was planted in the ground. I pointed to it. "Beverly," I said, "you're standing on my property right now. That stake is my line. You're 11 feet past it." She looked at the stake. Then she looked at me. Then she did something that surprised everyone on the job site, including me. She reached down and grabbed the survey stake with both hands and yanked it out of the ground. For about 2 seconds, nobody said anything. The surveyor stopped writing. Dutch looked at the stake, then at Beverly, then at me. Then Dutch said, in the tone of a man stating a fact he finds mildly interesting, "Lady, that's a state survey marker. Tampering with it is a Class B misdemeanor in this state." Beverly looked at the stake in her hands. Then she threw it on the ground, turned around, walked back to the Escalade in those kitten heels, every step loud and fast on the gravel, and pulled out of the road so hard the back tires threw rocks into the drainage ditch. I walked over and picked up the stake, set it back in the ground. The trail camera had gotten all of it, Beverly's face, her hands on the stake, Dutch's deadpan delivery, the whole thing, 4 angles, clear as daylight. I wrote in the legal pad, survey stake removed by Beverly Crace, 9:51 a.m. Witnesses, Dutch Kowalski, surveyor T. Aldrich, 2 neighbors, 4 cameras, replaced. The concrete truck arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, 18 footings, 42 inches deep. The steel posts went in plumbed and leveled. The horizontal rail was tacked by 11. By noon the line was set, literally, permanently set, concrete and steel on the true recorded boundary, 3 feet wider than what Beverly had torn out. Darcy Pruitt arrived at 5 past noon with a camera bag over one shoulder. She looked at the fence, then at the orange flags on the other side of it, the ones still planted in what Beverly had called an easement, the ones now standing inside my property line like small, confused soldiers. "Is that her flags?" Darcy asked. I said yes. "And your fence is past them?" "Yes." "So she was already on your land when she claimed you were on hers?" "Yes." Darcy smiled, started taking pictures. "What do you want on record?" she asked. I thought about it for a second. "I rebuilt the line in concrete and steel," I said. "It'll be here after she's gone." 3 weeks after the fence went up, the Cloverfield Meadows HOA held its annual meeting at the community center on Fletcher Road. 87 residents showed up, highest turnout in the HOA's history, by 41 people. Beverly had no idea why. Mallory had come back up for the weekend. She'd spent Friday evening printing and collating a 2-page summary document. Clean, clear, no legalese, just facts with dates and dollar amounts. She placed a copy on every chair in the community center before the meeting started. Beverly arrived to find the room already full and every seat already papered. I watched Beverly see the documents from across the room. She picked one up, read the first paragraph, put it back down. Her expression didn't change, but she gripped her HOA binder just a little tighter. I sat in the 4th row with Mallory on one side and an empty seat on the other that Dutch had been saving. Dutch was 3rd row center, arms crossed, looking like a man at a prize fight who has already bet the house. Councilwoman Patricia Osei came in at 5 past 7 and took a seat near the back. Beverly saw her and went visibly, carefully still. The meeting was called to order. Beverly ran through 2 routine agenda items at a pace that suggested she was hoping to get to adjournment before anything happened. She did not succeed. During old business, Dutch raised his hand and moved to add a discussion item, the Winslow property matter. Beverly said it was resolved. Dutch said he'd like the membership to decide that. He said it pleasantly, the way a union man says something that isn't actually a question. The membership voted to hear it, 69-7. Mallory stood up and addressed the room. She walked through the 2-page document, the 1952 plat versus the Drexel survey, the registered agent overlap between Drexel Land Services and Crace Property Solutions, the $8,400 in HOA funds paid to Beverly's own LLC, the court's denial of the TRO citing lack of legal standing, and the trail camera still image of Beverly pulling a state survey stake, time-stamped, laminated, 8 by 10. She wasn't loud, she wasn't dramatic, she was a paralegal presenting facts to a room of adults, and that was exactly the right register. When she finished, the room was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then a man named Gerald Hurst, who'd lived on Maple Trace for 11 years, raised his hand and asked Beverly directly, "Is this your company that received $8,000 from our dues?" Beverly said the survey had been independently contracted. Someone read the registered agent address off the handout, Beverly's home office, same zip code, same LLC attorney. Councilwoman Osei stood from the back of the room. She didn't raise her voice. She said she had forwarded the HOA self-dealing documentation to the county attorney general's office and that a formal inquiry was already open. She said it the way a person says something they have been waiting to say for 3 years. Beverly called for a recess. The membership voted to continue, 74-3. I stood up. I hadn't spoken until this moment, and the room went quiet when I did. The particular quiet of people who have been watching something build and now understand it's arrived. I walked to the front table and set down 5 items, one at a time, slowly. The 1952 plat, certified copy from Lenny Hapscom's ledger, the Aldrich and Sons survey, the county permit, the court docket showing the TRO denial, and last, the trail camera image, printed full size, laminated, Beverly's hands on the stake in the morning light of my property. I turned to the room, and then I turned to Beverly. 7 excavators came before I'd finished my first cup of coffee, I said. No permit, no court order, no legal authority. Just your company and your machine operators and your orange flags in my tomato plants. I let that sit for a second. When I rebuilt the fence on my actual recorded boundary, 3 feet wider than what you tore down, you tried to stop me in court and lost in 48 hours. You offered me $6,000 for land worth $34,000. And when you came to my property and pulled a licensed survey stake out of the ground in front of witnesses and 4 cameras, that was the Class B misdemeanor you added to everything else. I looked at her. I said it quietly, because quiet lands harder than loud. Beverly, you didn't fail to take my land. You handed me a bigger piece of yours. Dutch started clapping, slowly. Then the room came in, not raucous, more like the sound of people who had been holding something in for a very long time, and were finally putting it down. Beverly stood, opened her mouth, closed it, picked up her binder, and walked to the exit, her kitten heels on the linoleum floor echoing the whole length of the community center, all the way to the door. The door swung shut behind her. 86 people watched it close. The HOA board voted 5-1 that same night to open an independent financial audit of the association's accounts for the past 4 years. Beverly cast the one dissenting vote from the parking lot via text, which the board secretary dutifully recorded, and which Dutch described afterward as the saddest footnote in the history of parliamentary procedure. Darcy Pruitt's article ran online at 11 that night. By 7 the next morning, it had been shared 14,000 times. The headline was clean and factual. HOA President's Secret LLC collected $8,400 from her own neighborhood fund. Sometimes a story doesn't need embellishment. Sometimes the facts do the work. The state attorney general's investigation moved quickly once the article ran. Beverly was removed as HOA president pending the inquiry, a move the board made by unanimous vote, Beverly excluded. Crace Property Solutions was ordered to return the $8,400 to the association. The State Real Estate Commission reopened her 2019 case with the new self-dealing evidence Mallory had documented. Drexel Land Services lost its surveying license pending a separate investigation into the fraudulent boundary report. My homeowner's insurance paid out $4,100 for the destroyed cedar fence. I framed the check. It hangs in my garage behind the legal pad, which runs 47 pages, and will stay in the crawl space next to my original 1999 deed for as long as I own this land. The new fence became a small local landmark in the way that things do when a story gets out. Dutch's ironworker friends, the week after the pour, came back and welded something into the corner post, a small decorative bridge span about 6 inches wide, right at eye level. A nod to the municipal bridge work I'd done for 30 years. I didn't ask them to do it. I noticed it one morning when the light was right. I didn't mention it in any of the interviews. People noticed it anyway. The 3-foot strip I legally reclaimed, the land Beverly had tried to buy for $6,000 and accidentally handed me instead, I turned into a pollinator garden, native wildflowers, a cedar bee box, and a hand-painted sign at the corner post that reads, Surveyed 1952, Defended 2024. Councilwoman Osai helped me draft a proposed county ordinance requiring HOA board members to annually disclose any financial interest in companies receiving HOA contracts. The county council passed it 7-0. It's not a flashy law. It's not named after anyone. But it means that in Cloverfield County, what Beverly did cannot be done quietly anymore. The returned $8,400 went to the HOA's community fund. The new board, led by a retired schoolteacher named Edna Trask, who had been trying to unseat Beverly for 2 years, decided to use it to fund 2 annual vocational training scholarships, $4,000 each, one for a welding student, one for a surveying technician. Dutch nominated both categories. Edna accepted his suggestions without blinking. Dutch called it the Cedar Fence Memorial Fund, and that name stuck. Mallory stayed through Sunday. We had breakfast on the back porch. Eggs, bad coffee, the dog under the table. The new fence caught the morning light the way galvanized steel does in October, silver and cold and solid. The pollinator garden was just starting to come in. One of the native coneflowers was already open. I thought about the first fence. The Sunday I built it in 2002. The sandwiches. The dog running the perimeter. She thought she was taking something from me, I said. Mallory didn't look up from her coffee. She was. She just got the math wrong. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've sat across a table from a Beverly Crace of your own, or watched a system that's supposed to protect you get turned against you instead, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Some of you are sitting on cases just like this, and some of those cases are winnable. And if you want to see what happens when you play stupid games with an electrician who keeps 47 pages of notes and knows how to pour a footing, hit subscribe. Because Beverly isn't the last one of her kind, not by a long shot.